Prague in 1991 was a city peeling off its own skin. The Velvet Revolution's confetti had been swept away, leaving behind the grime of 4 decades of Soviet concrete and the nervous energy of a sudden, dizzying freedom. In the crooked alleyways of Old Town, past the tourist hordes at the astronomical clock, was a world of shadows and echoes. It was here, in a dusty second-floor lab above a pharmacy that still smelled of camphor and secrets, that Elias Vaclav developed the photographs that would unravel his world. Elias was an archivist by trade, a preserver of fading memories for the National Museum. In his private time, he was one of Prague's last true analog alchemists, a master of the darkroom he'd built from scavenged parts. The film canister had arrived in a crate of mixed ephemera from a closed STB, the state security warehouse in the suburb of Ruzin. The crate was marked for destruction, its contents a jumble of confiscated personal effects, faded love letters, broken watches, a child's drawing of a tank, and a single unmarked 35mm film cartridge. To Elias, it was archaeological salvage, a ghost to be coaxed back into the light. The negatives, when he hung them to dry in the ruby gloom of his lab, were a chaotic time capsule of the city in the 70s and 80s, grainy shots of Wenceslas Square under gray skies, stark images of the Charles Bridge devoid of tourists, somber portraits of everyday life under the pall of normalization. He made contact sheets, his magnifying glass hovering over the tiny frames, and that's when he saw it. Or rather, him. In a shot of a May Day parade from what looked like 1978, amidst a sea of drab coats and blank faces, stood a man on the periphery. He was tall, wearing a dark overcoat and a fedora, his face in sharp, clear profile despite the distance. He was not cheering, he was not holding a flag, he was simply watching, a still point in the forced current of celebration. There was an unsettling sharpness to him, a clarity that made the blurred, passive faces around him seem like smudges. Elias felt a minor chill. The man looked anachronistic. His bearing, the cut of his coat, it spoke of a different era, or perhaps no era at all. He moved on, but the man reappeared. In a shot of workers leaving the KD factory in 1981, there he was, leaning against a lamppost half a block away. In a somber photograph of a funeral procession for a dissident poet in 1985, he was a silhouette in a doorway across the narrow street. In a seemingly random snapshot of children playing in a courtyard in 1988, he was a blurred figure in the top-floor window. It was impossible. The film was from a single camera, a cheap Eastern Bloc model called a Smina, its serial number recorded on the canister. The dates of the events, verified by Elias's knowledge of Prague's history, spanned over a decade. The man did not age, not a day. The same sharp profile, the same posture, the same coat. He was a constant, a fixed point in the flowing river of time captured on this one roll of film, a man who was present at moments of public conformity, of quiet despair, of muted rebellion, a silent witness. Elias's archivist mind rebelled. It was a trick, a double exposure, a series of coincidental resemblances. But the clarity was too perfect, the contexts too varied. This was no photographic error. This was a presence, a stalking. He spent the night under the cold glow of his light table, arranging the 10 frames in which the man in the fedora appeared. He wasn't in every shot, but his appearances were not random. They were punctuation marks in a grim sentence of history. He was there at the parade, state power, at the factory, proletarian life, at the funeral, dissident death, at the children's play, innocence. He was an observer of the Czech condition. The final frame on the roll was different. It was not a street scene.
It was an interior, dark and blurry, taken without a flash. It showed a hallway with patterned wallpaper, a strip of carpet runner. A door was slightly ajar, and from within a sliver of light fell across the floor, illuminating the feet of someone lying prone. The focus was terrible, the camera likely hastily raised and clicked, but in the foreground, leaning against the wall just inside the frame, was a shadow. The shape of a fedora's brim was unmistakable. This was not observation, this was proximity. This was the scene of something terrible, and the observer was in the room. Elias leaned back, his heart thudding against his ribs. The air in the darkroom, usually a comforting cocoon, felt thin and charged. He had not developed a historical curiosity, he had developed a crime scene, and the sole, ageless witness to that crime and to a decade of silent history was staring back at him from 24 strips of celluloid. Who was this man? What was he doing there, then and everywhere? And what had happened in that dark hallway, captured in the final shuddering click of a shutter? The film was a ghost, and it had just whispered a name Elias was suddenly, terribly afraid to learn. The photograph is not a memory. It is a surveillance log. Elias Vaclav holds a roll of film that contains a chronological impossibility, a man who does not age, watching history unfold with the cold patience of a monument. But the final frame suggests the observer is not passive. He is a participant. What crime lies frozen in that blurry interior, and who or what is the man in the fedora? To follow Elias as he steps out of his darkroom and into the haunted streets of post-revolution Prague, chasing a ghost from the secret police's own archives, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The hunt for the timeless man begins now.
Sleep was impossible. The images of the man in the fedora were burned onto Elias's retinas, a silent film loop playing against the back of his eyelids. By dawn, the rational part of his mind, the archivist, the cataloger, had constructed a theory. The STB were notorious for their surveillance. They photographed everything: crowds, dissidents, their own parades to gauge participation. This film was clearly from one of their countless anonymous photographers. The man was likely an agent, a high-level one, perhaps, who had the unusual privilege of not aging in his file photos because they used old shots for his credentials. It was bureaucratic, mundane. The chill he felt was just the residue of STB malice seeping from the celluloid. But the archivist was at war with the artist in him, the man who believed in the truth of the image. The man didn't look like a bureaucrat. He carried an air of detached, almost clinical authority that went beyond secret police thuggery. And the consistency was unnerving. It wasn't just the face, it was the stance, the way he occupied space, as if he were a landmark the world had been built around. Elias needed context. The crate the film came from had a location code, RZ77/44. Ruzinier Warehouse, Section 77, Shelf 44. He had friends, or at least friendly contacts, in the new, chaotic office for the documentation and investigation of the crimes of communism. It was a place drowning in paper, manned by idealistic students and weary ex-dissidents. One of them, a sharp young woman named Teresa, owed him a favor for identifying some pre-war archival prints. He found her in a cramped office buried under mountains of brown files, the air thick with the dust of collapsed empires. When he showed her the contact sheets, her initial curiosity turned to a deep, focused intensity. She ignored the man at first, pointing at the faces in the crowd. "This parade, I've seen this angle before. It's from the STB's Mood Assessment Archive. They'd photograph crowds to analyze facial expressions for signs of dissent or enthusiasm." She traced a finger to the factory shot. "JKD, yes. They monitored workforce sentiment after the '77 Charter protests. Then the funeral. Jan Ponek, the poet, died in suspicious circumstances. The STB photographed the mourners to identify networks. And him?
Elias asked, finally tapping the fedored figure in each. Teresa peered closer, then fetched a large magnifying glass. She was silent for a long minute, moving from frame to frame. Her face paled. "I don't know him," she said quietly. "He's not in any rank and file files I've seen, but his presence, it's at key nodal points, not just events, but events they were intensely interested in." She looked up, her eyes serious. "Where did you get this?" He told her about the crate. She immediately looked up the code on a nascent, clunky database. RZ77. That's not a general confiscation section. That's, she typed slowly, Zvelchny evidence, special holdings, materials considered anomalous or of unexplained provenance, not for agent use, for internal security of the security apparatus itself. She met his gaze. They were afraid of what was in these boxes, Elias. They locked it away and marked it for burning. The words hung in the dusty air. The secret police had their own boogeymen. Elias pointed to the final blurry interior shot. "And this?" Teresa squinted. "The wallpaper, that pattern, I've seen it." She rummaged in a drawer and pulled out a file, flipping through crime scene photos from the 80s. She stopped at one, a dissident's apartment after a suicide. The wallpaper in the hallway was the same, a faded geometric pattern of ochre and brown. The address was scribbled in the margin, Uvas Street, number 15, apartment 4. "He was there," whispered Elias, "at a state murder." "Or he was the murderer," Teresa replied, her voice hollow. "Elias, you need to stop. Put this back. This isn't history. This is a landmine."
But it was too late. The hook was in his soul. That afternoon, driven by a compulsion he couldn't name, Elias went to Uvas Street. Number 15 was a crumbling Baroque building in the Castle District. Apartment 4 was on the top floor. It was now occupied by an elderly woman who knew nothing of the past. But the hallway, even repainted, he could feel the echo of the photograph. The angle, the light from the door. This was the place. As he left the building, a feeling of being watched, dense and physical, settled on his shoulders. He turned. Down the steep cobbled street, standing under the archway of a courtyard, was a tall man in a dark coat. The sun was behind him, casting his face in shadow, but the silhouette of a fedora was stark against the ancient stone. He was simply standing there, watching. Elias's breath caught. It was him. The man from the photographs, here, now, in 1991. He hadn't aged because he didn't need to. He was outside of time. The man didn't move. He offered no threat, no gesture. His stillness was more terrifying than any advance. Elias, his academic's courage evaporating, turned and walked quickly away, his neck prickling. He didn't look back until he was on a crowded tram. The archway was empty. The man was no longer just an image, he was a phenomenon, and he had just confirmed to Elias that the past was not past. It was watching, waiting, and it knew his face. Elias fled back to his darkroom, the only place he felt any control. But the safe darkness was gone. It was now the place where the ghost had first emerged. He locked the door, his back against it, the developed strips of the film lying on the table like evidence in his own impending trial. The ghost has stepped out of the photograph. The man in the fedora is not a memory. He is an active presence in Prague, and he has just made eye contact with Elias Vaclav. The STB feared him, filing him under anomalous. He appears in state murders and public spectacles with equal detachment. Who is he working for? What does he want? And why has he chosen now and chosen Elias to reveal himself? The archivist is no longer an investigator. He is the subject. To follow Elias as he digs into Prague's occult past for answers, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The shadow is closing in. The dark room was no longer a sanctuary, it was a cell.
Elias spent a feverish night under the weak bulb of his enlarger, making perfect 8x10 prints of every frame containing the man. He laid them in chronological order on the floor, creating a mosaic of a stalking. The man was a constant, but the background shifted from the broad canvas of history to the intimate horror of a murder scene. The final print, the blurry hallway, was the terrifying period at the end of the sentence. He needed to understand the camera, the tool that had captured this phantom. The Smina camera was a mass-produced piece of Soviet-era junk, but the film, he re-examined the canister under a strong light. There, scratched faintly near the lip, was not a serial number, but a symbol, a circle with a line through it, like an astronomical sign for a planet, and below it, the number IX. It was a mark he'd never seen, not factory stamp, an inscription. His research led him away from photographic manuals and into stranger territory. In the library's esoteric section, buried in a German tome on Renaissance symbology, he found it. The circle with the line was the alchemical symbol for Azoth, the universal solvent, the animating spirit of matter. It was also, in certain Hermetic traditions, a sign for the Timeless One, the observer outside the mercury of fleeting time. The number 9, IX, perfection, completion, the end of a cycle. This was no STB mark. This was something older, weirder. It spoke of a different kind of observation, not political, but metaphysical. His mind recoiled. He was an archivist of the tangible, yet the evidence was leading him into the fog. He remembered an old man, Mr. Svoboda, a master clockmaker with a tiny, cluttered shop near the Jewish quarter. Svoboda had repaired Elias's vintage Leica years ago and had spoken of cameras as time catchers, devices that stole slices of duration. He was rumored to have done clandestine work for the Academy of Sciences, building precise timing mechanisms for experiments he was never told the purpose of. He was also, Elias recalled, a student of Prague's hidden histories, the city of alchemists and golems. Svoboda's shop was a cave of ticking. 1,000 clocks covered the walls, their seconds clicking in a chaotic, mesmerizing symphony. The old man, bent and spectacled, listened in silence as Elias laid out the prints, pointing to the final blurry print, his gnarled fingers tracing the shape of the fedora in the shadows. "You have found a constant," Svoboda said, his voice a dry whisper like gears meshing. "In the city of variables, he is the fixed point. You think he is a man. He is more like a landmark, a stitch in the tapestry of this place." "What does that mean?" Elias asked, desperation creeping in. "Prague is built on layers," Svoboda explained, moving to a complex orrery of brass planets on his desk. "The stone you see, the history they teach, and then the older city, the city of Rudolph II and his mad magicians, the city that sought the philosopher's stone, not just to make gold, but to understand the prima materia, the first matter. Some believed they succeeded not in creating, but in perceiving, in creating a lens through which the underlying structure of reality could be seen." He tapped the photograph. "This is not a man. This is a phenomenon, a perceiver, a witness to the structure." "A witness to murder?" "A witness to consequence," Svoboda corrected, "to cause and effect, to the points where human action bends the fabric of things. The parade, the factory, the funeral, the death, these are nodes, points of high energy, of collective emotion or violent change. He appears at these nodes, he is drawn to them, or perhaps, the clockmaker's eyes grew distant, he is placed there." Elias thought of the alchemical symbol on the film canister. Who would place him? The STB? Svoboda gave a dry, rasping laugh. The secret police were children playing with matches in a powder kid built by wiser, darker men. No, there is something else, an older service, a custodianship. When the Habsburgs fell, when the Nazis came, when the communists took over, they remained. They watch. They ensure the experiment continues. What experiment? Elias breathed. Prague, Svoboda said simply. The city itself. It is a focal point, a ley line confluence, a place where the veil is thin. The 20th century was a century of terrible, concentrated human energy here. Wars, occupations, revolutions, repression, an unimaginable release of psychic force. What if someone long ago set up instruments to measure that force, to channel it, to study it? He pointed a trembling finger at the man in the fedora. This is not a man. This is an instrument, a gauge, a living seismograph for human history. The idea was monstrous, insane, yet it fit the evidence better than any mundane explanation of spycraft, an immortal observer cataloging the trauma of a nation, a sentinel for a secret, ongoing experiment on the soul of a city. As Elias left the shop, his mind reeling, Svoboda called after him, his voice suddenly urgent. Mr. Václav, you have developed the film. You have seen the constant. You are now a variable in his equation. He is aware of you, and the experiment does not tolerate uncontrolled variables. The warning echoed in the ticking silence of the shop. Outside, the Prague evening was settling, the Gothic spires becoming black cutouts against a bruised purple sky. Elias felt the weight of the city's gaze upon him, not just the man's, but the gaze of the ancient watchful stones themselves. He wasn't uncovering a conspiracy, he was stumbling onto the laboratory floor of something vast and amoral, and the instruments in the lab were now turning to look at him. The mystery has deepened into the metaphysical. The man in the fedora is not human. He is an instrument, a constant in a hidden, century-spanning experiment on the city of Prague itself. Elias is no longer just an archivist. He is a newly introduced variable in a dark equation, and the observers are noting his presence. But who are the experimenters? What is their goal? And what happens to variables that disrupt the study? To follow Elias as he searches for the architects of this horror, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The laboratory is waking up.
The concept of Prague as a laboratory, its citizens unwitting subjects in a century-long experiment, settled on Elias like a leaden cloak. The romantic, tragic city of his birth was suddenly a cage, its beautiful streets a maze designed by unseen jailers. The man in the fedora was a warder, making his rounds, checking the dials of suffering and repression. He needed to find the architects. Swoboda's words pointed to an older service. Elias's mind, trained in archives, turned to the oldest archives of all, the ones not written on paper, but in stone and whisper. He began to walk the city not as a native, but as an intruder, looking for cracks in the facade. He returned to the locations from the photographs with new eyes: the May Day parade route, the CKD factory gates, the funeral path for the poet Panik. At each site, he looked not for the man, but for anomalies: a peculiar manhole cover that didn't align with the sewer maps he covertly checked at the municipal office, a seemingly decorative stone finial on a building opposite the factory that had a smooth, lens-like quality, a drain grate near the funeral route that was too clean, too free of the city's grime. They were small things, easily dismissed, but together they formed a pattern of observation that was physical, embedded in the city's very architecture. This wasn't just a man watching, it was a system. His break came from an unexpected source: Teresa, the documentarian. She called him, her voice tense with excitement and fear. "Elias, I kept digging. The special holdings crate. It wasn't alone. There was a ledger. I found a reference to a sub-department within the STB, so secret it had no official name, just a code. ODBORK, Department K. Its purview was non-standard phenomena and historical continuity.
They liaised with an external group. The ledger lists disbursements, not for weapons or informants, but for site maintenance, sensor calibration, and agent upkeep. The last payment was dated November 1989, the week before the Velvet Revolution began. Agent upkeep? Elias asked, the phrase chilling him. One recurring entry, Teresa whispered, for a Herr D, payments in Swiss francs delivered to a numbered account. The description for ongoing observational services per the Imperial Compact. The Imperial Compact. The words had the weight of centuries. Elias thanked her and hung up, his mind racing. Herr D. The man in the fedora had an initial, and he was paid not by the Czechoslovak state, but by something that predated it, something that made a compact with an empire. The Holy Roman Empire? The Habsburgs? His research led him to the Strahov Monastery Library, to dusty folios of Habsburg administrative decrees, and there, in a footnote, in a marginalia crowded document from the reign of Rudolf II, 1576 to 1612, he found it. A decree authorizing a special stipend to be paid from the imperial treasury to a Königlicher Beobachter, a royal observer. The observer's duty to monitor the spiritual health of the capital and report on any disturbances in the etheric equilibrium. The stipend was to be administered in perpetuity by a trust to a holder of the title Der Unveränderliche, the unchanging one. Elias's hands trembled on the vellum. Rudolf II, the mad emperor who collected dwarves and arcane knowledge, who employed alchemists like John Dee and Edward Kelly. He hadn't just sought the philosopher's stone. He had institutionalized the search. He had created a permanent office, an immortal civil servant to watch over Prague's etheric equilibrium. The experiment had a founding charter, and it survived the empire's fall, its funding seamlessly transferring from monarchy to republic to protectorate to socialist state, hidden in the budgets of each regime's secret police. Department K was just the latest mask. But why? What was the etheric equilibrium? And disturbances looked like what? He thought of the blurry photograph, the murder on Uvot Street, a violent death, a rupture, a disturbance. The observer was there to record it, to measure it. That night, driven by a reckless need for confirmation, Elias went to the old Jewish cemetery. It was closed, but he knew a broken gate. Among the tilted, crowded tombstones, he sought not a name, but a symbol. In the moonlight, he found it on the grave of Rabbi Judah Loeb ben Bezalel, the legendary creator of the golem. Carved at the base was not just Hebrew, but the same alchemical symbol from the film canister, the circle with the line, Azoth. As he stood there, the hair on his neck stood up. He wasn't alone. Between the graves, standing as still as the tombstones themselves, was the man in the fedora, Herr D, Der Unveränderliche, the royal observer. The moonlight caught the rim of his fedora, casting his face in deep shadow. He made no move. He simply observed, as he observed the parade, the factory, the funeral. Now he was observing Elias at the grave of a man who knew how to animate clay. The message was clear. I see you. I have always been here. You are walking paths I know well. Elias's courage shattered. He fled the cemetery, the silent, timeless gaze burning into his back. He ran until he reached the Voltova, leaning against the cold stone of the Karl's Bridge, gasping. The city around him, with its 1,000 spires, no longer felt like home. It felt like the decorated walls of an immense, ancient vivisection chamber, and he was on the table. The conspiracy has a birth certificate signed by a mad emperor. The man in the fedora is Der Unveränderliche, a royal observer created to monitor Prague's spiritual equilibrium, a living instrument paid for by every regime for over 400 years. Elias has uncovered the continuity of the experiment, but understanding the purpose hasn't freed him. It has trapped him deeper. The observer has now marked him, observing his investigation as just another data point. How do you fight a phenomenon? How do you escape a cage that is the city itself? To see Elias's desperate attempt to break the cycle, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The variable is about to rebel.
Flight was impossible.
The observer was not a man who could be outrun. He was a condition of Prague itself. Elias understood that now. To escape, he would have to break the experiment. But how does one sabotage a 400-year-old metaphysical study? You don't attack the instrument, you attack the data. His plan formed in a fever of sleepless logic. The observer recorded disturbances in the etheric equilibrium. Violent death was clearly one such disturbance. But what about its opposite? What about an act of profound, public, irrational creation? An event of positive, unifying energy so strong it would register as an anomaly, a blip the ancient protocols couldn't categorize, a variable introducing a new equation. Elias was not an artist, but he was a master of reproduction. His weapon would be the image itself. He would use the observer's own medium against him. He would create a ghost of his own. He spent a week in a manic preparation. Using his darkroom skills, he created hundreds of photograms, images made by placing objects directly on photosensitive paper and exposing it to light. He used found objects, keys, leaves, clock gears, pages from old STB files, a child's wooden toy. He created abstract, haunting compositions of light and shadow. Then he used an old overhead projector to scale them up, tracing the shapes onto large sheets of white cloth. His canvas would be the Zhizhkov television tower, the city's tallest, most hated symbol of the communist era, a stark, futuristic spike jutting from a neighborhood of old tenements. It was a perfect symbol of imposed reality. He would reclaim it. With the help of a few brave, confused art students he vaguely knew, and leveraging the last of his savings for bribes to a lax night security guard, he executed his plan on a foggy Tuesday night. They scaled the service ladder inside one of the tower's concrete legs, hauling up the massive folded cloths. At the designated hour, using a network of ropes and pulleys, they unfurled the sheaths from the tower's observation deck, letting them fall down the sides. They weren't banners with messages, they were vast, enigmatic photograms, ghostly negatives glowing under the tower's own spotlights, a key the size of a bus, a giant spreading leaf over the city, a looming abstract face made of clockwork. It was breathtakingly strange, a surreal, peaceful haunting of the brutalist monument. By dawn, a crowd had gathered, not in protest, but in wonder. People took pictures, laughed, debated what it meant. It was the talk of the city, a mysterious, beautiful act that had no political agenda, only a desire to bewilder and delight. It was, Elias hoped, a genuine anomaly, a positive shockwave. He watched from a cafe across the city, exhausted, elated, terrified. He had done it. He had created a node of harmless, creative energy. Would the observer come? Would the ancient seismograph register this new kind of tremor? He didn't have to wait long. As the afternoon sun slanted through the cafe windows, he saw him. The man in the fedora was standing across the wide square, his gaze not on the tower, but directly at Elias through the glass. His expression was, as always, unreadable, but he was there. The experiment had noted the anomaly. Then something unprecedented happened. The observer raised his hand, not in a wave, but in a slow, deliberate gesture. He pointed, first at Elias, then up toward the castle district. Then he turned and walked away, melting into the flow of pedestrians. It was a communication, an instruction. Elias's heart hammered. This was not part of the plan. The instrument was not just recording, it was directing him. The royal observer was summoning the variable to a debriefing. He had no choice but to follow. The directive was clear. He took a tram up to the castle, his mind a whirlwind. Was this the end? Was he being led to his own deletion from the experiment? Or was this impossibly an audience?
The observer led him not to a secret chamber, but to a public yet deeply symbolic place, the Basilica of St. Vitus within the castle complex. He stood in the shadows of a towering Gothic pillar near the tomb of St. Wenceslas. When Elias approached, the man spoke for the first time. His voice was not deep or ominous, but neutral, precise, and slightly archaic, like a recording from an old, well-maintained machine. You have introduced a harmonic, a minor one, but perceptible. The parameters of my observation, as defined by the Compact of 1589, do not account for artistic gestures of this nature. It is noise.
"What do you want?" Elias managed to say. "The experiment requires purity of data," the observer continued as if lecturing. "War, oppression, revolt, death, these are strong, clear signals. Your installation is static. It clouds the readings. You will cease." "Or what?" Elias asked, defiance rising. Finally, the observer turned his head. His eyes were a pale, watery gray, devoid of malice, but also of any humanity. They were the eyes of a surveyor assessing a troublesome tree. "Or you will be normalized. You will become a signal I am equipped to measure." A threat of violence delivered with the calm of a scientist stating a fact. The observer's purpose was to monitor Prague's trauma. If Elias persisted, he would become trauma, a data point of violent death neatly recorded. The meeting was over. The observer walked away, disappearing into the gloom of the cathedral. Elias was left alone with the saints and kings, the message chillingly clear. He could stop, fade back into the background static of the city, or he could continue and become the next blurry photograph in a terrible, timeless collection. The rebellion has been noted, and the instrument has issued a warning. Elias's beautiful anomaly is noise to the experiment, and he has been told to cease or be transformed into a usable data point, a victim. But Elias is no longer just a scared archivist. He has tasted defiance. The question now is not how to hide, but how to fight an enemy that views murder as mere data normalization. Can a variable sabotage the lab? The next step is not creation, but destruction. To see Elias's dangerous gamble to dismantle the observer's very purpose, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The variable goes to war. The cold, clinical threat in the cathedral left Elias not with fear, but with a crystallized rage. He was not noise, he was a man, and the observer and the hidden architects of this experiment had reduced the suffering of millions, the parades, the factory grind, the murdered poets, to strong, clear signals. His city's pain was someone's data set. This was a profanity beyond any secret police atrocity. It was a violation of history itself. He couldn't kill the observer. The creature was likely unkillable, a perpetual motion machine of observation. But he could attack the system that sustained him. He needed to find the source of the Imperial Compact, the trust that had paid Air D for centuries. He needed to find the money. Teresa, his contact at the documentation office, was even more afraid, but now equally furious when he shared his conclusions. Together, they pieced together the financial trail from the Stab ledger. The Swiss account was a dead end, but the payments originated from a domestic source, a shell charitable foundation called the Prague Historical Preservation Trust, registered in 1921, just after the founding of Czechoslovakia. Its board members were a list of long-dead lawyers and bankers. Its current administrative address was a prestigious law firm on Parizhska Street. Elias went to the firm, posing as a researcher.
The young associate he met was polite but unhelpful. The trust was a passive entity, its funds managed automatically, its only activity the annual disbursement of a stipend to a designated recipient. A curious bequest, the associate mused. The terms are extraordinarily rigid. The payment must be made in Swiss francs, delivered to the specified account on the 1st of November every year in perpetuity. The only condition for termination is the confirmed and permanent cessation of observational duties. It's all very mysterious. Cessation of duties, that was the key. How do you confirm the permanent cessation of an immortal observer? The observer would have to be seen to stop observing. But by whom? The trust's trustees were dead. The mechanism was automatic, unless... Elias asked to see the original founding document, claiming a need to verify a citation. Reluctantly, the associate brought a photocopy. The compact, updated and re-ratified in 1921, was written in dry legal German, and there, in Clause 7, was the answer. Verification of the observer's status shall be the responsibility of the Custos Pragens, or Prague custodian, a separate office provided for in the accompanying appendix. The custodian, a human check on the immortal instrument, someone who could theoretically declare the observer defunct and stop the payments. Elias had found a potential flaw in the system. But who was the custodian? The appendix wasn't included in the copy. His search led him back to the streets, to the oldest, most secretive Prague of all, the world of rare book dealers and collectors of occult ephemera. In a tiny shop in Malastrana, run by a man who smelled of dust and wormwood, he found a reference. In a privately printed biography of a minor noble from the Rudolfina era, a footnote mentioned that the title of Custos Pragens was traditionally held by the head of the Ordo Equitis Astris, the Order of the Knight of the Star. The Order of the Knight of the Star. Elias had never heard of it. The bookseller, seeing his genuine obsession, leaned close. A phantom order, not of chivalry, but of stewardship. It is said they were the practical arm of Rudolph's occultists. While Dee and Kelly sought the stone, the knight and his order built the apparatus to protect the city from its own spiritual volatility. Or, he added with a cynical smile, to harness it. Who is the knight now? Elias asked. The bookseller shrugged. If the order exists, it is one man. He would be the keeper of the keys, the one who knows where the lenses are pointed and why. He paused. There is a story that the knight is always a clockmaker. Time and observation are cousins, no? Svoboda, the old clockmaker. He had known too much, spoke in metaphors that now sounded like technical specifications. He had said they watch and ensure the experiment continues. Elias had thought he was a scholar. He was, in fact, the custodian.
Swoboda sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. He set down his tweezers. I am the caretaker of a bequest, Mr. Vaslav. A thankless task. I ensure the mechanism is oiled, that the stipend is paid. I do not decide what he observes. The compact does. The city's history does. You can stop it, Elias insisted. The compact says you can verify the cessation of his duties, declare him retired. Swoboda looked at him with pity. And on what grounds? He has observed for 4 centuries. He will observe for 4 more. He is a fixture. To declare him ceased would be like declaring the Charles Bridge ceased. It is a fact of Prague. Then help me break the mechanism, Elias's voice rose. Help me create an event so anomalous, so outside his parameters that he cannot observe it, that his data is rendered meaningless. For the first time, a spark of something besides resignation appeared in Swoboda's eyes. Curiosity. The clockmaker's love for a novel problem. An unobservable event, he mused. A paradox for the paradox. He was silent for a long time. "There is one possibility. The observer is tuned to human energy, collective emotion, violence, creation born of struggle. But what if something purely non-human? An event with no human causation, no emotional resonance? A mechanical miracle? A clock that strikes a time that does not exist?" He explained. The Prague astronomical clock, the horloge, was itself a masterpiece of observational science. Its mechanisms calculated celestial time. But deep in its original design, hidden by its 15th century creators, was a theoretical midnight reset, a function that, if triggered, would not tell the time of day, but would symbolically recalibrate the clock to a moment outside of recorded history, a mythical year zero of Prague's founding legend. It was a symbolic gesture, never meant to be used. If you could trigger that reset at the stroke of midnight in the precise way, it would be an event of pure arcane mechanics, a ripple in the artificial timekeeping of the city. The observer is a creature of historical time. He measures its eddies and flows. An ahistorical moment, a glitch in the clock, it might be a blind spot, a thing he cannot see because it exists outside his perceptual frame. It was a mad plan. Sabotage the horloge to create a metaphysical smokescreen, but it was the only weapon they had. Svoboda, the custodian, had just given Elias the blueprint to break his own charge. The old man's motivations were unclear. Perhaps centuries of guilt, perhaps a craftsman's desire to see if his ancient machine could finally truly break. He provided Elias with a copied page from a forbidden grimoire of clockwork showing the location of a hidden keyhole within the horloge's inner chamber. The stage was set. The target was not a man, but a clock. The goal was not to destroy, but to momentarily fracture the very concept of time in the city's heart. Elias would have to infiltrate the clock tower and perform the ritual of the false midnight. And all the while, the timeless eyes of the observer would be upon him, recording his every move, until the very second the clock struck a time that never was. The fight moves from the streets to the very machinery of time. Elias, with the reluctant help of the experiment's own custodian, plans to hack the Prague astronomical clock to create an unobservable event, a mechanical anomaly outside of history. But the observer is always watching. Can Elias execute this arcane sabotage under the gaze of the timeless witness? And what happens if he succeeds? Will it blind the observer, or will it trigger something far worse? The heist of history begins at midnight. To witness the attempt to break time itself, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The final countdown starts now.
The plan was insanity woven with clockwork precision. Svoboda had provided not just the location of the hidden keyhole, a disguised panel behind the figure of death on the horloge's lower calendar dial, but also a key. It was not a metal key, but a timing key, a slender rod of laminated wood inscribed with celestial angles. It would not turn a lock, but when inserted into the correct sequence of geared axles at the moment of the clock's internal midnight reset, it would theoretically trigger the dormant year zero function. Elias had 2 nights to prepare. He studied the clock's public blueprints, memorized guard patrols, minimal, it was 1991, not the Middle Ages, and assembled tools. Dark clothing, a small crowbar, a flashlight with a red gel to preserve his night vision. The real weapon was the wooden key, which felt disturbingly light, as if made to measure not space, but duration. The night arrived, cold and clear. The old town square was deserted, lit by the sickly orange of streetlights. The Gothic facade of the town hall, with the horloge embedded in its side, loomed like a sleeping giant. Elias, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, used a trick Svoboda had told him about, a service entrance for the clock's keepers, its lock famously simple.
A twist of a filed-down Allen wrench, and it gave way. Inside, the tower was a stone throat. He climbed the ancient, worn stairs, the smell of dust and old machine oil thick in the air. He reached the chamber behind the famous clock faces. It was a cacophony of ticking, a mechanical jungle of gears, drive shafts, and weights. The massive brass mechanisms gleamed dully in the beam of his red flashlight. It was the beating heart of Prague's public time. Finding the panel was harder than expected. The carvings were dense, symbolic. He finally located the figure of death, a skeletal marionette holding an hourglass. Behind its carved robes, his fingers found a seam. A careful pry with the crowbar, and a small rectangular panel swung inward. Inside was not a lock, but a complex arrangement of 3 brass axles, each with a slot that seemed to vibrate in sync with the deep tick-tock of the main escapement. This was it. Now the wait. He had to insert the key into all 3 slots in sequence during the 60-second window when the clock's internal mechanisms reset for the new day, a process that began at 11:59 and ended at midnight. His watch was synchronized to the second with the town hall's master clock. He crouched in the darkness, the wooden key slick in his sweaty palm, the gaze of the carved apostles seeming to judge him from their hidden tracks. At 11:58 and 30 seconds, he began. The first slot was for the wheel of the sun. He inserted the key. It fit perfectly, sliding in as if magnetized. He felt a subtle vibration, a harmonic hum through the wood. The second slot for the wheel of the moon was trickier, requiring him to reach deeper. The clock's gears whirred around him, a symphony building to its crescendo. He slotted it home. The clock began its chiming sequence for midnight. The wooden figures of the apostles started their procession past the windows. The external bell began to toll. Bong. This was it. The final, most critical slot controlled the wheel of fate, the astronomical dial. He had to insert the key on the 12th toll, the moment of temporal transition. Bong. Bong. He counted, his breath held. The mechanism was thrumming, energy building. Bong. He aligned the key. Bong. 12. He drove the key into the 3rd slot. For a second, nothing happened. Then the sound of the clock changed. The familiar, ponderous tick-tock stuttered. The gears around him ground against each other with a sound of protesting metal. The procession of the apostles halted jerkily, half completed. The external bell tolled a 13th discordant note, a flat, wrong note that echoed over the silent square. Inside the chamber, something miraculous and terrifying occurred. The hands on the astronomical dial, visible through the internal framework, didn't move forward. They began to spin backwards, slowly at first, then faster, a blur of brass against the starry chart. The calendar dial below whirred, months flipping back in a blur, until it settled not on a date, but a single archaic word etched in the metal that Elias had never seen before. Primus. First. The clock had entered its year 0 state. It was telling a time outside of history. And then he felt it, a sudden, profound silence. Not an absence of sound, for the gears still whirred oddly, but an absence of pressure. The ever-present feeling of being watched vanished. It was like a lens focusing away from him. He had done it. He had created an event the observer could not process, a glitch in the timeline he monitored. For this moment, Elias was off the grid. But the victory was short-lived. A new sound echoed up the stone stairwell, not the steady tick of time, but the slow, deliberate click of leather soles on stone. Someone was coming up. Not a guard. Their steps would be hurried, confused by the clock's malfunction. These steps were measured, unhurried, inevitable. Elias scrambled back from the open panel, leaving the key inserted. He shrank into the deepest shadow of the gear assembly. The door to the chamber creaked open. A figure stood in the doorway, tall, wearing a dark coat. The fedora was a stark cutout against the dim light from the stairs. The observer, Herr D. He had come. But he was not observing the clock. He was staring directly into the shadow where Elias hid.
His head was tilted as if listening to a frequency only he could hear. The timeless eyes scanned the chamber, passing over the whirring, backward-spinning dials with no interest. They settled on Elias. The absence of the watching pressure returned, but now it was replaced by something worse, a focused, intentional attention. The paradox had not blinded him, it had drawn him. He had come to the source of the anomaly, the variable that was causing the noise. The observer took a step into the room. His hand went into his coat, not for a weapon, but to withdraw a small, old-fashioned notebook and a pencil. He began to write, his eyes never leaving Elias. He was recording, not the event, but the variable causing it. The experiment was adapting. The unobservable event had just made the observer very interested indeed. The clock has been broken, time has been bent, but the observer is not defeated. He has simply refocused his gaze. Elias's attempt to create a blind spot has instead turned him into the most interesting specimen in the lab. Cornered in the clock tower with the immortal witness, Elias is no longer a rebel, he is a subject under direct examination. How do you escape when the eye of history itself is upon you? The confrontation in the mechanical heart of Prague is about to reach its chilling conclusion. To see if Elias can survive becoming the experiment's primary target, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The observation is now direct.
The plan was insanity woven with clockwork precision. Svoboda had provided not just the location of the hidden keyhole, a disguised panel behind the figure of death on the Orloy's lower calendar dial, but also a key. It was not a metal key, but a timing key, a slender rod of laminated wood inscribed with celestial angles. It would not turn a lock, but when inserted into the correct sequence of geared axles at the moment of the clock's internal midnight reset, it would theoretically trigger the dormant Year Zero function. Elias had 2 nights to prepare. He studied the clock's public blueprints, memorized guard patrols, minimal, it was 1991, not the Middle Ages, and assembled tools, dark clothing, a small crowbar, a flashlight with a red gel to preserve his night vision. The real weapon was the wooden key, which felt disturbingly light, as if made to measure not space, but duration. The night arrived, cold and clear. The old town square was deserted, lit by the sickly orange of streetlights. The Gothic facade of the town hall, with the Orloy embedded in its side, loomed like a sleeping giant. Elias, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, used a trick Svoboda had told him about. A service entrance for the clock's keepers, its lock famously simple. A twist of a filed-down Allen wrench, and it gave way. Inside, the tower was a stone throat. He climbed the ancient, worn stairs, the smell of dust and old machine oil thick in the air. He reached the chamber behind the famous clock faces. It was a cacophony of ticking, a mechanical jungle of gears, drive shafts, and weights. The massive brass mechanisms gleamed dully in the beam of his red flashlight. It was the beating heart of Prague's public time. Finding the panel was harder than expected. The carvings were dense, symbolic. He finally located the figure of death, a skeletal marionette holding an hourglass. Behind its carved robes, his fingers found a seam, a careful pry with the crowbar, and a small rectangular panel swung inward. Inside was not a lock, but a complex arrangement of 3 brass axles, each with a slot that seemed to vibrate in sync with the deep tick. The scratch of pencil on paper in the humming, anomalous silence of the clock chamber was the most terrifying sound Elias had ever heard. The observer wrote with methodical precision, his pale eyes fixed on Elias as if he were a rare insect. He was not a hunter, he was a cataloger, and Elias had just fluttered into his net. Subject exhibits proactive interference with calibrated environmental metrics, the observer said aloud, his neutral voice cutting through the whir of the broken clock. He was dictating his notes. Motivation appears to be a rejection of observational parameters stemming from emotional contamination, a desire for meaning outside measurable data. "Stop it," Elias said, his voice shaking. "I'm not your subject." The observer paused his writing, looking up with mild curiosity.
You are a component of the Prague environment. Your actions generate data. Your current action, the induction of a chronometric anomaly, is a high-value event. Your psychological state is a relevant variable. He took a step closer. Explain the emotional imperative behind this sabotage. He wasn't asking for a confession. He was taking a sample. Elias felt a surge of defiant fury. The imperative is that you don't get to turn my city's pain into your spreadsheet. People lived and died here. They loved and suffered. It wasn't a signal, it was a life. The observer listened, then made another note. Subject assigns anthropocentric narrative value to stochastic historical processes, seeks to impose story upon data, a common cognitive error. He looked around at the spinning dials. This mechanism, a clever attempt to create an observational null point, it has instead created a localized temporal dissonance, a valuable data point in itself. You have been more useful than you intended. He was winning simply by documenting. Elias realized that any action, any word, just fed the experiment. Fight or flight, silence or speech, it was all data. The only way to win was to become irrelevant, to be boring. But how could he, when he was standing in the epicenter of a clutch striking the year zero? The observer closed his notebook and put it away. He approached the central mechanism, studying the inserted wooden key with detached interest. The custis provided this, an unexpected variable from within the maintenance system. This will require calibration of trust parameters. He reached for the key. This was Elias's chance. While the observer's attention was on the mechanism, he could run. But run where? Down the stairs, into the square, back to a life that was now permanently under this thing's microscope? He would be a marked man forever, a fly in amber under an immortal gaze. No, he couldn't run. He had to break the gaze itself. Elias remembered Svoboda's words. He is a creature of historical time. The observer's perception was tied to the continuum he monitored. The Orloi was now outputting, primus, a time before history, before data. What if Elias could trap him in that moment? As the observer's fingers closed around the wooden key, Elias didn't flee. He lunged forward, not at the observer, but at the clock's main drive weight, a massive iron cylinder suspended on a cable. He shoved the crowbar he still had into the gear train linked to the weight's release mechanism. There was a shriek of tormented metal. Gears snapped. The drive weight, suddenly freed, plummeted down its shaft with a deafening roar. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The carefully balanced force driving the clock went haywire. The backward spinning hands on the astronomical dial froze, then sheared off with a crack, flying across the chamber. The calendar wheel with primus shattered into brass fragments. The entire chamber became a storm of flying metal parts, whirring springs, and the awful sound of a masterpiece tearing itself apart. But the key effect was on the hidden mechanism Svoboda's key had activated. The sudden loss of power caused a feedback loop in the arcane calibration. A surge of pent-up mechanical energy with nowhere to go discharged backwards through the key itself. The observer was still touching the wooden key. There was a sound like a thunderclap contained in a tin can, a flash of actinic blue light, not of electricity, but of something else. Crackling, distorted time erupted from the keyhole and traveled up the observer's arm. He didn't scream. He stiffened, his head snapping back, his fedora tumbling off. For the first time, Elias saw his full face, sharp, ageless, but now contorted in an expression of pure, uncomprehending shock. His pale eyes were wide, reflecting the chaotic whirl of breaking clockwork.
The blue energy cocooned him for a split second. Then, with a final grinding screech from the dying clock, the light imploded. The observer didn't vanish. He stuttered. He became a series of rapid, flickering afterimages. Him in the parade, him at the factory, him in the doorway, him here, all superimposed and vibrating. He was a film strip jammed in a projector, burning. Then, silence. The clock was dead. Gears, springs, and brass shards littered the floor. The observer was gone. Where he had stood, there was only a faint ozone-like smell and a slight warping of the air, like heat haze on a summer road. On the floor lay his fedora, undamaged, and his notebook fallen open. Elias staggered, ears ringing. He picked up the notebook. The last entry in that precise hand was unfinished. Subject-induced cascade failure in horloge mechanism resulting in a localized temporal... The sentence stopped mid-word. He had done it. Not by outsmarting the observer, but by overloading the system he was part of. He had turned the clock's anomalous state into a weapon and unleashed a temporal backlash. The observer hadn't been killed. He had been unmoored, thrown out of sync, a constant made variable. The sound of shouts came from the stairs, the guards finally alarmed. Elias pocketed the notebook, left the hat, and fled down a secondary maintenance ladder he'd noted earlier. He slipped out into the cold Prague night just as police cars, their sirens wailing the wrong kind of alarm, converged on the old town square. He walked, numb, through the back alleys. The city felt different. The pressure, the ancient watching weight, was gone. Truly gone. He had not just escaped observation, he had shattered the lens. But as he looked up at the spires against the night sky, he wondered, had he freed Prague? Or had he simply broken the gauge, leaving the experiment, whatever its true purpose was, to run blind and unchecked? And what happens to an experiment when its primary instrument disappears? The observer is gone, unmade by the very anomaly he came to measure. Elias stands in a suddenly silent city, the weight of centuries of observation lifted. But victory feels hollow and terrifying. What was the experiment truly for? Who were its real directors? And without its timeless watchmen, what new forces might be drawn to the unmonitored spiritual equilibrium of Prague? The instrument is broken, but the laboratory remains. To witness the unsettling aftermath and the new shadows that gather in the observer's absence, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The experiment is not over. It has entered a new, uncontrolled phase.
The destruction of the astronomical clock made international news, a bizarre act of vandalism, a national tragedy. Experts theorized about extremist groups or a lone madman. No one mentioned temporal feedback or immortal observers. Elias Vaclav was not a suspect. He was nobody, a faceless archivist. He quit his job at the National Museum, citing stress. He spent his days in his apartment, the observer's notebook on his desk, a relic of a war no one else knew was fought. The notebook was a chilling document, page after page of crisp, emotionless observations spanning decades. Not just of the events in the photographs, but of hundreds more. A street fight in 1968, a lover's quarrel by the river in 1975, a burst water main in 1982. Each was logged with time, location, and a code for emotional intensity or socio-political resonance. Prague was reduced to a graph of human output. The final interrupted entry was a monument to his own success. But as the weeks passed, a new unease grew. The silence he had fought for felt wrong. It was the silence of an empty house, not a peaceful one. Prague had always been a watchful city. Now it felt like a city with its eyes closed, vulnerable. He began to notice other things. Small, strange malfunctions, streetlights flickering in complex patterns that felt like codes. The echoes in certain courtyards lasting a fraction of a second too long, as if the stone was remembering a sound from another time. Pigeons flocking in perfect geometric formations before scattering in panic. It was as if the city's underlying mechanism, stripped of its primary observer, was glitching. The etheric equilibrium Svoboda mentioned was destabilizing without its meter. He went to see the old clockmaker. The shop was closed, a sign saying, "Gone away," in shaky script. Elias had a bad feeling. He picked the lock. Inside, the thousands of clocks were in chaos. They were not stopped. They were all telling different, impossible times. One cuckoo clock chimed continuously. A grandfather clock's pendulum swung in a frantic, jerky ellipse. The symphony of ticks had become a cacophony of discordant time. In the center of the room, Svoboda's work chair was empty. On the bench lay a single unfinished gear and a note in the old man's hand. The custodian leaves when the watch breaks. The trust is void. The accounts are settling. They are coming for the laboratory. Save what you can. S. They, the experimenters, the ones who built the apparatus, the Order of the Night of the Star, or whatever they were called now. With the observer gone and the custodian fled, the experiment was unmonitored and unmaintained. The directors were coming to inspect the damage, to clean up, to perhaps reset the experiment with new, more robust instruments. Elias was not just a free variable now, he was loose contamination, and he knew too much. He had to disappear. But a deeper, stubborn part refused. He had fought for the soul of his city, even if that soul was just a hypothesis in a madman's ledger. He couldn't abandon it now. Using the codes and locations from the observer's notebook, he began a counter-operation. If the observer's notes were a map of the sensors, Elias would sabotage them. He found the anomalous manhole cover near the factory. Under it was not a sewer, but a chamber housing a strange, crystal-like node humming with residual energy. He smashed it with a hammer. He located the lens-like finial opposite the old parade route. It was a sophisticated piece of optics wired to a filament that glowed faintly. He shattered it. He was systematically blinding the lab, tearing out its instruments. It was petty, desperate vandalism against a power he couldn't comprehend, but it felt like the only thing left to do. One night, as he was disabling a sensor hidden in a bridge abutment, he was caught. Not by police, but by two men in dark, expensive wool coats. They moved with a quiet, athletic grace that screamed, not STB. More like private security or private intelligence. They didn't ask questions. They simply moved to grab him. Elias fought with the frantic strength of a cornered animal. He broke free, sprinting across the Charles Bridge, the men in close pursuit. He ducked into the labyrinth of Mala Strana, his knowledge of the city's alleys his only advantage. He led them on a frantic chase until he lost them in the courtyard of the Liechtenstein Palace. Gasping for breath, he leaned against a cold wall. A calm voice spoke from a shadowed archway. Your disruption is quantifiable, Mr. Vaclav, but ultimately insignificant. A man stepped into the dim light. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and the sharp, patronizing face of a senior banker or diplomat. He wore a flawlessly tailored suit. This was no operative. This was management. The Prague Metrics project has been ongoing for 402 years. A temporary instrument failure, while regrettable, is within contingency parameters. The data stream, however, must be restored. You have damaged some peripheral hardware, annoying but replaceable. Who are you? Elias demanded. A steward of legacy, the man replied. You can think of us as the board of directors for a very long-term venture. The city produces a unique form of energy, historical pain, collective memory, artistic repression. It's a potent, if unpredictable, resource. We measure it. We have, at times, learned to stabilize its output. The Observer was a 19th century upgrade to a 16th century system. You have forced an earlier than scheduled upgrade cycle. A resource for what? Elias spat. The man smiled thinly. For understanding, for control. The 20th century was a fertile period here, so much beautiful data. Now with the velvet transition, we anticipate a new phase. National catharsis, capitalist angst, nostalgic resentment, richer, more complex data. We cannot have an uncalibrated environment. A new observer will be installed. Elias's blood ran cold. It never ended. He had fought a battle against a ghost, only to face the corporation that owned the ghost. You will come with us, the man gestured. The two pursuers appeared at the courtyard entrance, blocking his exit. Your unique interaction with the previous instrument makes you a fascinating case study. You will be our guest while we recalibrate. Elias was trapped. The men approached. He had nowhere to run. He had fought time and he had fought a phantom. Now he faced the cold, practical money behind it all. And they didn't want to delete him, they wanted to study him. The true architects have revealed themselves, a cold corporate entity treating Prague's soul as a resource. The observer was just a tool, now slated for replacement. Elias, the rogue variable, is now a prized specimen to be captured and analyzed. The fight for the city's memory has become a fight for his own mind and body. Cornered by the new human face of the ancient experiment, Elias must make a final desperate choice. To see the last stand of the archivist against the Forever Men, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The final audit begins.
The two men in wool coats moved with efficient menace, closing the pincer. The silver-haired steward watched with detached interest, a scientist about to acquire a rare beetle. Elias's back was against the damp palace wall. The courtyard offered no escape. His mind, trained to preserve, now screamed for a way to erase himself from their records forever. Then he felt it. Not a pressure, but a presence. A familiar wrongness in the air. From the deepest shadow of the archway behind the steward, a shape condensed. It was less a body and more a collection of shadows refusing to align properly. It shimmered, a human-shaped flaw in reality. And atop it, perched at an impossible transient angle, was a fedora. The observer, or what was left of him. He was not whole. He was a superposition, a permanent stutter. One moment he was there, sharp and solid. The next he was a translucent afterimage of himself, at the parade, at the factory, at the clock tower. He was a shattered lens, but a lens that could still focus malice. The steward sensed it. He turned, his cool composure cracking for the first time, revealing a sliver of primal fear. Impossible! The cascade failure was total. The thing that was Herr D spoke, but its voice was a chorus of echoes, each word overlapping with a whisper from a different decade. Data, stream, interrupted. Directive, corrupted. New, prime, directive. Its flickering gaze, a storm of pale, shifting eyes, settled on the steward. Identify, anomaly. Source of interference. It had not come for Elias. It had come for the ones who had built it, who now spoke of replacing it. The broken instrument, adrift in broken time, had fixed on the architects as the source of its own malfunction. Its logic was shattered, but its purpose, to identify and quantify disturbances, remained, horribly twisted. The two operatives reacted, drawing sleek modern pistols. They fired at the shimmering figure. The bullets passed through it, each impact causing the phantom to flicker more violently, its temporal instability increasing. With each shot, its form solidified somewhere else, behind one man, then the other. Its hand, flickering between a solid glove and a bony transparency, touched the first operative. The man didn't scream. He aged. Decades crumbled into him in seconds. His hair turned white, his skin wrinkled and sagged, his spine curved. He collapsed into a pile of ancient bones and rags, the pistol clattering from a skeletal hand. It wasn't murder. It was a violent, localized acceleration of time. The second operative fired wildly, backing away in terror. The observer's form stuttered next to him, a touch on the chest. This time the process reversed. The man de-aged, his body shrinking, his suit becoming comically large, his face smoothing into the bewildered visage of a toddler, then an infant, before winking out of existence entirely. A life rewound to zero. The steward was backing toward the courtyard entrance, his face ashen. The observer turned its chaotic attention to him. Steward of legacy. You calibrated the instrument. You are a variable.
I am your director,
The steward shrieked, all pretense of control gone. Directive corrupted. All is variable. All must be measured. It reached for him. Then the steward did something. He pulled a small black device from his pocket, a pager or something like it, and pressed a button. "Contingency Omega, zero the sight," he yelled into it. He turned to run. The observer's flickering hand passed through the back of his coat. The steward didn't age or youth. He simply unfolded. His body flattened into a two-dimensional shape, then a line, then a point of light that vanished with a soft pop. He had been edited out of dimensionality. Then the observer turned its terrible, unstable gaze to Elias. It hovered, a storm of contradictory moments. Primary variable, source of cascade. It began to glide toward him, a collection of historical moments seeking to reconcile itself by consuming the anomaly that created it.
This was the end. There was no fighting this. But as Elias looked into the chaos of its eyes, he saw something. A reflection, not of himself, but of the city. The clock tower breaking, the sensor shattering, the steward vanishing. The observer was now a recorder of its own destruction. Its data was pure noise. And in that, Elias saw his only chance. He didn't run. He stood his ground. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the observer's own notebook. He held it up, open to the last unfinished entry. "You want to complete your log?" Elias shouted, his voice steady for the first time. "Here it is. The subject induced a cascade failure. The result is you. You are the data now, a recursive anomaly. Observe that." The observer stopped. Its flickering intensified. It seemed to be trying to look at the notebook, at itself, at Elias all at once. The chorus of voices spiraled into a cacophony of dates, locations, codes. 78, parade. 81, factory. 85, funeral. 91, clock. Primus, primus, primus. The word primus began to dominate, a stuck record of the ahistorical moment. The entity began to vibrate, its form blurring into a solid sphere of chaotic light. The fedora dissolved. The echoes merged into a single, sustained, silent scream of torn chronology. Then, with a final, soundless implosion, it collapsed in on itself. There was no flash, no bang, just a sudden, absolute vacuum of presence, as if a hole had been punched in the world and then seamlessly mended. The courtyard was silent. The steward and his men were gone, erased. Only Elias remained, unharmed, the notebook in his hand. On the cobblestones where the observer had last stood, there was a single, perfectly developed black and white photograph. Elias picked it up. It was a picture of this courtyard, taken from the archway at this exact moment. In the photo, he stood alone, looking at the ground where the photograph itself now lay. A paradox in silver nitrate, the final self-consuming frame. He walked out of Malastrana as dawn broke over Prague. The glitches he had noticed, the flickering lights, the odd echoes, had stopped. The city felt quiet, normal, empty in a way that was no longer terrifying, but simply neutral. The laboratory was gone. The instruments were silent. The directors had been zeroed. The experiment was over. Elias Vaclav returned to his darkroom one last time. He developed the final self-referential photograph and added it to the series. He placed the entire set, along with the notebook, into a steel box. He took it to the banks of the Vltava, to the very edge of the water where the city's reflection shimmered. He did not burn it. He did not bury it. He simply held the box over the dark flowing water and let it go. It sank quickly, swallowed by the river that had seen empires and revolutions, alchemists and spies come and go. The film was gone. The observer was gone. The archive was closed. Prague was just a city again, with all its beauty and its scars, its history no longer a resource, but simply a story. Elias Vaclav turned and walked into the morning, a man finally alone, unobserved, and free to be simply, imperfectly human. The loop is closed. The observer consumed itself in the paradox of its own existence, taking its masters with it. Prague is free from the ancient experiment, its pain its own again, its future unwritten. Elias Vaclav, the archivist who developed a ghost, has buried the evidence in the river of time. But some truths once seen cannot be unseen. He will walk the streets of the unwatched city, forever knowing the price of its silence and the terrifying freedom that lies beyond the frame. The film has reached its end, but the negative, the memory of what was done, is etched forever. If you are drawn to the stories that hide in the light of day, to the secret